In the heart of rural Pennsylvania, hidden deep within the misty forests, sat Blackwood Manor, a grand but decaying mansion with a sinister past. Local legends whispered of strange occurrences, ghostly apparitions, and a darkness that lingered within its walls. For decades, the house remained abandoned, avoided by even the bravest of souls. That was until the Harrington family moved in. In 1993, John and Lisa Harrington, along with their two children, Michael 12 and Sarah 9, moved into the mansion, hoping to restore it to its former glory. John, a history professor, was fascinated by the house's past, dismissing the chilling rumors as mere folklore. The first few weeks were uneventful aside from the occasional creaking floorboards and distant whispers that could easily be attributed to the old house settling. But then things took a sinister turn. One night, Lisa was alone in the kitchen when she felt a cold breeze brush past her, despite all the windows being shut. A faint whisper echoed in her ear, "Get out." She spun around, heart pounding, but found nothing. She chalked it up to exhaustion and kept quiet, not wanting to alarm her family. Then came Michael's nightmares. He would wake up screaming, claiming a shadowy figure stood at the foot of his bed every night. The figure, he said, had no face, just hollow, black voids where eyes should be. Sarah, the youngest, began talking to an imaginary friend named Emily. At first, it seemed like harmless child's play, until she started describing Emily in unsettling detail: pale skin, dark hollow eyes, and a whispery voice that only she could hear. One day, Lisa overheard Sarah whispering, "Emily says she doesn't like Daddy. She says something bad is coming." The disturbances became impossible to ignore. Doors slam shut on their own, furniture move without explanation, and chilling whispers filled the halls at night. One evening, John set up a video camera in the living room, determined to debunk the hauntings. The next morning, he reviewed the footage. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the fireplace lit up on its own, and a shadowy figure appeared in the reflection of a mirror. It stood there, watching. Fearing for their safety, John delved into Blackwood Manor's dark history and discovered something horrifying. In the 1800s, the house had belonged to the Whitmore family, whose only daughter, Emily Whitmore, had mysteriously vanished at the age of 10. Her parents, consumed by grief, searched for her for years until her mother, in despair, took her own life. Her father was later found hanging in the attic. Rumors spread that Emily's disappearance was tied to a dark ritual gone wrong, that her spirit was trapped within the house. Realizing the paranormal connection between their daughter and Emily, the Harringtons decided to leave, but the house wouldn't let them go so easily. The night before they planned to move out, Lisa was violently dragged from her bed by an unseen force, leaving deep claw marks on her arms. Michael saw the faceless entity standing at the end of the hallway, its hollow eyes locked onto him. The house trembled with a low, cattle growl. They ran as they sped away. Sarah turned to the back seat window and whispered, "Emily says goodbye." The Harringtons never spoke of what happened at Blackwood Manor. The house remains abandoned to this day, and locals still report hearing whispers when they pass by. Some claim they've seen a small girl standing in the window, staring with hollow eyes. The house has had multiple owners, but none stayed for more than a few months. Paranormal investigators have documented high levels of activity, including cold spots, disembodied voices, and shadow figures. Blackwood Manor stands as a chilling reminder that some places are never meant to be disturbed and some spirits never rest. Ethan had always been skeptical of ghost stories, dismissing them as mere fiction. But when he moved into the abandoned house on Willow Street, he found himself questioning everything he once believed. The first night was uneventful, save for the eerie silence that enveloped the house. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. Whispers echoed through the hallways at night, their voices hushed and unintelligible. Objects moved on their own, shifting ever so slightly when no one was looking. One evening, Ethan decided to investigate. Armed with only a flashlight, he followed the whispers down to the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the moment he reached the bottom, the whispers ceased. The silence was suffocating. As he turned to leave, the door slammed shut. Panic surged through him as he pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then, out of the darkness, a voice whispered his name. It was a voice he recognized, his late grandmother. Terrified, he turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room. Its form was indistinct, shifting like smoke, but its eyes burned like embers in the darkness. "You shouldn't be here," the voice murmured. The room suddenly came alive with shadows, twisting and writhing as if in agony. Ethan screamed as the figure rushed toward him. The next morning, he was found lying unconscious at the top of the basement stairs. He never spoke of what happened that night, but he moved out the very next day. And though the house remains abandoned, some say if you listen closely at night, you can still hear the whispers calling his name. After moving out, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him. At night, he would wake up drenched in sweat, feeling as though unseen eyes were watching him. Strange occurrences continued in his new apartment. Lights flickered, cold drafts swept through rooms, and sometimes he would hear that same whispered voice calling his name. Determined to get answers, he researched the history of the Willow Street house. He found that in the early 1900s, a woman named Margaret Holloway had lived there. She was rumored to be a reclusive witch who had vanished mysteriously, leaving only her diary behind. Local legends said her spirit never truly left the house. Ethan tracked down the diary, now kept in a small historical archive. As he flipped through its brittle pages, he read about Margaret's experiments in communicating with spirits. Her final entry chilled him to the bone. The shadows whisper secrets of the beyond. But I fear I have let something in, something that does not wish to leave. Determined to put an end to his torment, Ethan returned to the abandoned house. This time he came prepared with salt, candles, and a recording device. As he stepped inside, the temperature plummeted, the whispers grew louder, almost excited. Ethan set up a circle of salt around himself and lit the candles. He began to recite an incantation he had found in Margaret's diary, hoping to banish whatever presence lingered. The air grew thick, the shadows pulsed, and suddenly the figure reappeared closer this time. "You shouldn't have come back," he hissed. Ethan felt an unseen force pushing against him, trying to break the protective circle. He continued chanting, his voice shaking. The entity shrieked, a sound so inhuman it set chills down his spine. The room darkened, and for a moment, Ethan thought he might not make it out alive. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went still. The candles flickered out, and the oppressive weight lifted. Ethan gasped for air, realizing he was alone once more. He left the house for good that night, and as he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. For a brief moment, he saw a pair of burning eyes staring back at him from the darkness. Even now, years later, Ethan avoids speaking of what happened. But deep down, he knows some doors once opened and never truly be closed. It was a cold winter night in 1998 when veteran truck driver Jack Wallace found himself hauling cargo from New Mexico to Texas along the desolate stretch of Highway 40. The road was eerily quiet, the stars hidden behind thick clouds, and the only sound was the rumbling of his 18-wheeler against the pavement. Jack had been driving for nearly a decade, and he had heard his fair share of trucker ghost stories, phantom hitchhikers, haunted rest stops, and shadowy figures lurking along the highways. But he had never believed in any of it. That night, however, his skepticism would be put to the ultimate test at exactly 13 a.m. as Jack was making his way through a particularly isolated stretch of highway. He spotted something unusual ahead, a woman standing on the side of the road. She was barefoot, dressed in a thin, flowing white dress that fluttered in the icy wind. Her hair was long and disheveled, and her skin was pale, almost to pale. Jack instinctively slowed the truck. "What the hell is she doing out here in the middle of nowhere?" he muttered under his breath. As he got closer, he noticed something even stranger. The woman wasn't shivering, despite the near-freezing temperatures. She stood motionless, her arms hanging limply by her sides, as though the cold didn't affect her. Jack hesitated, but then decided to pull over. He rolled down the window and leaned out. "Mum, do you need help?" he called. For a moment there was silence. Then, slowly, she lifted her head. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to swallow all light. Before Jack could react, the passenger door of his truck creaked open on its own. The woman climbed into the seat without a word. Every instinct in Jack's body screamed at him to run, but his hands stayed frozen on the wheel. His pulse thundered in his ears as he glanced at her. She sat completely still, her hands resting on her lap, staring straight ahead. Jack swallowed hard. "Where are you headed?" he finally managed to ask. No response. Instead, the radio suddenly hissed with static. The temperature inside the cab dropped drastically. Jack gripped the wheel tighter. "Ma'am, I don't know what's going on, but if you need help, you have to talk to me." Still nothing. And then, in the reflection of the windshield, he saw something that made his stomach lurch. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. Suddenly, the truck veered violently to the right, as if something unseen had grabbed the wheel. Jack yelled and struggled to regain control, his heart hammering in his chest. As he fought to straighten the truck, he chanced another glance at the woman. She was gone, but before relief could set in, he noticed something in his side mirror. A figure was crawling on the back of the truck. Its limbs were grotesquely long, fingers splayed unnaturally as it clung to the side of the trailer. Its face was pressed against the window of the sleeper cab, grinning. And then a voice whispered directly into his ear, "You shouldn't have stopped." Jack slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt, and he threw open the door, stumbling out onto the icy pavement. Ahead, Through the fog, he saw a flickering neon sign, Miller's Motel Vacancy. Desperate, he sprinted towards the building and burst through the front doors. An elderly woman sat behind the counter, looking up at him with mild interest. Jack, panting, leaned against the desk. "Please call the police. Someone was in my truck." The old woman squinted at him. You saw her, didn't you? Jack blinked. What? She sighed and shook her head. "You're not the first, son. Won't be the last either." She gestured towards the wall behind her. Jack turned and felt the blood drain from his face. There, tacked to the wall, was a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Young woman killed on Highway 40. Driver never stopped to help." Beneath the headline was a grainy black and white photo of a woman. The same woman Jack had picked up. His head spun. He turned back to the old woman, his throat dry. "But she was in my truck. I saw her. She whispered to me." The old woman nodded grimly. "She does that. Looking for the one who left her behind. Looking for someone to stay with her forever." Jack left that night without another word. He quit his job the next morning and never drove long haul again. But other truckers on Highway 40 tell stories. Some say they've seen a woman standing alone in the dead of night, waiting. Others claim to hear whispers on their CB radios, a soft, mournful voice calling out, "Will you stop for me?" A few swear they've glimpsed a pair of empty, black eyes watching from their rearview mirror, and sometimes one of them never reaches their destination. Would you stop if you saw her? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Subscribe for more real horror stories. If you're ever driving alone at night and you see a lone woman on the road, keep driving.